Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. There are lots of funds out there right now for broadband deployment and infrastructure. Obviously there's the big infrastructure bill that people are kind of waiting for, getting ready for, but there's a lot of money right now flowing that's helping to bridge the digital divide. I'll be talking about that today. Be right back. Hey, thanks for joining me. Rick Uzzi here with Zcorum. So, we're thinking about looking ahead to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and part of that, there's $42.5 billion as part of the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, part of that, plus there's money for affordable broadband, there's tribal broadband in there, there's middle mile broadband dollars, all that stuff's wrapped up in that big infrastructure bill. But we probably won't be seeing that money until early 2023, next year. There's a lot of money out there. I've talked about that in the past, what's available with ARPA and USDA ReConnect and some other things. So I ran across some stories just recently, and it hit me. It just struck me that there's a lot that's going on right now. There's a lot of broadband deployment happening, and I just noticed these different stories, and they all kind of cover a different aspect of funding and how you can get money to do these things. So I thought I'd go over a little bit of that today. So starting out here, you see City of Lebanon says a new project will bring broadband to every home by December 2022. And this is interesting. They got this little image on here, and I thought originally this was an ad loading that was taking a really long time, but I think the idea is that this is just taking a really long time to load. So it's saying why you need broadband. If you don't have it, then that's the kind of thing that would be showing up on your screen. So let's just read through a little bit of this and we'll see which one this is. I can't recall. So each of Lebanon's homes could soon have a broadband connection. On Monday, city officials joined U.S. Rep. Annie Kuster to announce a project to connect 142 homes without high-speed internet to the service. So this is kind of what we have in a lot of communities is, we think it's this huge number of people that don't have broadband. It might just be a section of folks, 142 in this case. But if you're one of those people, it's really significant that you don't have good broadband. So they're trying to the whole point of all of this broadband money is to try to connect up every single person to broadband. Again, a lot of people, you'll see in a lot of these articles, they say, especially if it's about an electric co-op or power company doing it, it's like this is back when we were trying to get everybody connected up to electricity. It's that important, they're saying. So see here, Lebanon Mayor, Lebanon, I believe this was New Hampshire. Yeah, New Hampshire. Lebanon Mayor Timothy McNamara said the lack of high-speed internet access has been especially difficult for parents and children attending online school during the pandemic. So you'll see that a lot in these stories where they're saying, okay, here's why we're doing this. This has been the problem. The project is separate from another effort in Grafton County to connect rural communities with broadband. Those city officials say they have worked with the Grafton County Broadband Committee on their project and support those efforts. I thought this was interesting. That effort has faced challenges from internet providers who say they are already providing services. So what's going on there is Grafton County said, we're just going to cover this whole area. And the internet providers came in and said, well, wait a minute, we're providing broadband here. So the broadband providers are leaning on the fact that they may be providing broadband to a few, a handful, maybe more customers in a particular geographic area, but there's a vast number of people, maybe comparatively in that area, that don't have broadband. So they're saying it's covered. So they're making these challenges that are making it difficult for this Grafton County project. It says here the city took a different approach. The county project is focusing on communities with little to no broadband coverage, while Lebanon is filling in gaps of an area mostly covered by high-speed services. So in other words, again, you've got most of the area covered by high-speed services by maybe, we'll see here, maybe somebody like Comcast, but then there's some difficult to reach customers, these 142 that don't have it. Between 3 and 4% of homes in Lebanon are not connected to high-speed internet, according to city officials. So this project is funded in part by ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act funds. I did a video about that not too long ago. I'll post a link to the video I did about ARPA. And they're getting $60,000 of the $595,000 coming from ARPA. So it's not a lot of money, but they're getting $60,000 from ARPA for that. And it's interesting that Comcast is funding the remainder of the project. So Comcast is going to step up there as well. So generally it says residents with long driveways must pay a fee for an additional extension of service. But for this project, residents will not need to pay out of pocket for those extensions. So a lot of times that's the issue. And they say long driveways. I'm assuming this is not a driveway like I have where you walk 20 feet to get the mail. This is probably a long driveway in a rural area. So what will happen is if somebody wants broadband, they might call up Comcast and say, hey, I'd like to get a connection. And Comcast will say, well, it's going to cost you this much for us to get a connection there. Not your normal setup fee, but some amount that you have to pay for them to do the work. So in this case, I think probably these ARPA funds are going to compensate Comcast. A lot of it's going to be compensating Comcast probably for these fees that they would normally have to pay and have the customer pay. Says city officials say that households currently without broadband should have it by December 2022. So that's good. That's not going to take too long. And again, probably because Comcast is in the area, they'll get these funds to help them defray the cost of connecting up these final 142 homes. Another story up here. So this is rural broadband development moving forward, says Washington State USDA director. So this is the USDA fund, probably USDA ReConnect would be most likely what that is. Make that bigger so we can all see it. And sure, I'll accept those cookies. Washington State's rural counties are the target of a litany of newly announced U.S. Department of Agriculture funding programs. This is USDA aimed at improving the state's infrastructure. One key component will be improving access to broadband internet in historically underserved rural communities. And that's pretty much the thrust in a lot of these programs, but especially with USDA. The ReConnect is really meant for rural areas and a lot of times farm areas. I don't know if these would be farm areas in Washington, but they do tend to focus on rural there. In 2019, this bill passed, which placed requirements on the Public Works Board to establish competitive grant and loan programs aimed at promoting broadband in underserved areas. This would be in Washington State. Bryce Johnson summarized some of the issues that have historically delayed that expansion. Part of it was that there was incorrect mapping by the FCC, she said. So this is one of the issues that we have, and it's very similar to what I was talking about in the previous story, where if you have just a handful of customers covered in a census block, the FCC map said that area was covered. So even if you've got 5% of the customers, even less, in a census block that get what's considered broadband, and right now that's 25 by 3, the FCC map said that area was covered. Well, that's why we need new maps, and that's why the FCC is working on that. So they're saying that's one of the issues traditionally they've had is bad maps. They would show a place like Island County as being covered because a certain proportion of the population had access to internet, yet there were broad swaths of rural areas that didn't and still don't. Another issue has been the need for the federal government to subsidize the requisite infrastructure, and obviously there's a lot of that taking place right now. There's not enough connections per mile to make the bottom line for broadband providers stock and their shareholders. So again, that's the issue, as I was talking about with Comcast and having to do these, maybe these long driveways and extend their network out. It's the same thing if you've got a rural area, you've got a customer per mile or less, then it's very expensive. So that's what these federal broadband programs that are subsidizing this, whatever they happen to be, ARPA, ReConnect, the IIJ that's coming up, all of that is meant to resolve these issues. These programs can come in to help fill that gap. There's been some changes in the laws that now allow some public utilities or public entities to help with that. And that's probably talking about the fact that a lot of these states are passing laws that say, hey, we are going to allow municipal broadband, because that has been an issue where in some cases, some lobbyists have said, municipalities should not be in the business, or EMC should not be in the business because it competes with the private operators, the public sector competing with the private operators, those for profits. And there's still a concern there. So there's a balance between allowing a municipality or an EMC to get funds to provide internet, and then whether there's already good existing broadband already. What we're trying to do is make sure that we're not overbuilding, spending tax dollars to overbuild good existing broadband. So there's still that thing to be concerned about. But as it said here, there have been some positive changes probably where there were, a lot of times there might be a really onerous thing, law or something in the budget that says no municipality or EMC can provide internet regardless of whether there's good service there. So a lot of that's been taken care of. Here we have Alaska. Over 23,000 rural Alaskans get access to high-speed internet thanks to the Alaska Communications Broadband Network expansion. And you can see this says an Alaska Communications field technician drives through North Pole, Alaska. So it is very difficult in Alaska. They've got permafrost, really hard ground, it's really cold. You have to use, in some cases, a snowmobile to get out and do stuff. You've got a truck. If you can see it in the background, there's apparently reindeer flying around there. It's North Pole, Alaska. Does that make sense? So you can see this is not a good area to want to put down broadband, but it's got to be done. Alaska Communications has expanded broadband service by more than 23,000 locations in underserved areas of Alaska. This expansion is funded in part through the FCC's Connect America Fund 2, CAF 2 program, so Phase 2. So CAF 2 is what preceded RDOF. So this is funding that goes several years back. So they're just now, it looks like this is just now coming to fruition with CAF 2 funds. This is great. The number of people are getting access to this. Now CAF 2 was originally based on a 25/3 broadband definition. So that's what people had to sign up for. There were some satellite providers. This was prior to Starlink, but Viasat got some dollars. I don't know if they are providing some of this. Or just other wired providers, but it says here, under this expansion, Alaska Communications Service offers speeds exceeding the bandwidth required by CAF 2 in most locations. Again, that's 25/3. And it being difficult in Alaska, you know, it's going to be harder to do gigabit broadband, so it could be different. They could be doing wireless or some other things, but they're supposedly getting over 25/3, which was a requirement for CAF 2. We're excited about what 2022 has in store, said Bishop. Network expansions, new technologies, and new federal funding programs. That could be, they could be thinking of the IIJA. They could be talking about maybe they've got an application into ARPA or maybe ReConnect, USDA ReConnect. They said that will positively impact thousands of Alaskans. So again, here's another funding program where you've got money that's being used that is getting people broadband. Now this is an interesting one. You know, in the earlier ones where they're laying fiber, those all get taken off of the map. So we're talking about the FCC maps being bad. So the FCC is working on new maps, and they're going to be putting down everywhere that does not get broadband would be considered underserved if it's not 100/20, and it would be unserved if it's not 25/3. Well, these areas that we're talking about right now, where they're getting turned up for broadband in 2022, these are areas that are not going to be on the map. They're on the map now. Let's say if FCC looked at it and they're deciding who has broadband, who's underserved and unserved, but they're not going to be on the final FCC map if these projects go through. So you can see, even though there's a lot of money, $42 billion out there waiting to service these underserved and unserved areas, these unserved and underserved areas are getting taken off the map every day as these earlier federal funds and other funding sources are helping to close the digital divide. Here we've got 3 more NTIA tribal broadband connectivity grants awarded. This is money that's been available for tribal broadband. These grants were awarded today as part of the Department of Commerce's NTIA tribal broadband connectivity program. That's $1.5 million that went to Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians in Lincoln, Oregon, and 2 Alaskan villages. So we got Alaska again, the village of Clark's Point and the native village of Selawik. There have been 280 requests for funding under the program. The program, initially funded through the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, made $980 million available for grants to eligible Native Americans, Alaska Native Hawaiian entities for broadband deployment, digital inclusion, distance learning, telehealth, and workforce development. So again, these are areas that will not be part of IIJA if they get served now through this tribal program. Now, the IIJA does include, as it says here, the recently enacted bipartisan infrastructure law provides an additional $2 billion in funding for this program, but these areas will be taken off the map because they'll be served, but there's an additional $2 billion that will be available when the IIJA funds become released. With most of the recent grants, NTIA has now made a total of 7 awards totaling about $4 million through the program. NTIA will announce additional awards on a rolling basis as the applications go through a review process. And then we've got Jackson EMC to announce broadband partnership. That's really small too, hold on. So I thought this was interesting. So this is a partnership. So that's another opportunity where organizations maybe don't take federal funds, but they get together and they partner. Now you can still partner and get funds. That doesn't mean that if you do a public-private partnership that you can't get funds, but they're not mentioning that here. It's certainly possible that they did. But I think the key thing is here is this partnership that they're setting up. And you see a lot of this now between EMCs and phone companies, or maybe a municipality and a service provider that's in the area, to be able to share infrastructure and kind of the burdens of getting internet to these unserved areas. So there's not a lot in this story. There's more to come, but the Jefferson-based Jackson EMC which is here in Georgia where I live, is announcing a partnership that is designed to expand internet access in Northeast Georgia. Vista, headquartered in Chester, South Carolina, will provide broadband for 250,000 customers, that's a lot of customers, in the Jackson EMC service area. So one of the things about EMCs is, and this is the biggest one in Georgia, really one of the biggest in the country, is an EMC covers a huge amount of territory. So these are the perfect entities to reach these really rural areas, because once you get outside of the cities and the towns, then who's going to do it, right? You got these, again, these long runs of, maybe one customer per every couple of miles as you get in these areas between cities and towns. So you've got this EMC partnering up with this broadband operator in South Carolina. Details will be spelled out in a Thursday news conference at the Capitol in Atlanta. One of the commissioners, I thought this was interesting, Commissioner Lauren Bubba McDonald. I remember there was a radio show here in Atlanta, and they would, every now and then, like maybe once a week or maybe once a month, I can't remember, but they would call a Waffle House somewhere in Georgia, and they would ask for Bubba. And 90% of the time, somebody picked up the phone and said, "This is Bubba." So there's lots of Bubbas in Georgia, just wanted to make you aware of that. So again, this is going to be coming up this week, this meeting. Jackson EMC, the largest electric co-op in Georgia and one of the largest in the nation, is headquartered 50 miles northeast of Atlanta in Jefferson, Georgia. Cooperative serves more than 245,000 meters on 14,000 miles of energized wire. So that's a huge area that they cover. So this is going to make quite an impact as far as broadband goes in these areas. So again, these are areas, if this gets rolled out prior to the IIJA, then all these areas will be off the map as far as what will be unserved and underserved. Vista, headquartered in South Carolina, Chester, South Carolina, 125-year-old leading provider of broadband services. I'm guessing they were a phone company. And associated applications such as voice, video, and security in Midlands region of South Carolina and Northern Georgia. So they do service Northern Georgia as well. So this is a good partnership for them. And finally, we've got just basically private investments. So GWI to expand fiber optic broadband networks in 5 main communities. Make this a little bigger. I meant to do that beforehand. A Bidford internet provider plans to expand broadband networks in 5 main communities, including parts of South Portland. Great Works Internet Partners, or GWI, said Monday that it intends to install 240 miles of fiber optic cable in these various places. The broadband expansion will reach 12,000 homes and businesses. Construction should be completed by early 2023. So again, depending on when that's completed, these areas may not be unserved or underserved at the time when these dollars are released. And I don't know what happens in a situation like this where if they're well into the project and they've got fiber in the ground and they just haven't turned it up yet, then they would be challenging, I would think, anybody that wants to come in and build there. So even if the FCC at some points puts out these maps, there will be a challenge process. And with a fiber project like this in place that's going to be launched in 2023, most likely it will not be eligible for any funds from the broadband program, the BEAD program that's part of IIJA. It says here, our goal is to provide universal and ubiquitous service for all. Fiber infrastructure plays a vital role in addressing these challenges for the long term. So as far as funding for the $9.5 million build out in South Portland and Belfast was provided by Arctis Impact Investors, a Boston firm. So this is an investment company. The Finance Authority of Maine, a public funding agency also known as FAME, provided a 20% loan assurance on the Arcturus investment. FAME also provided a $1 million direct loan for post-construction costs in Belfast and South Portland. So again, here's just another option for companies is to get private funding, companies to look at that as well. So as you can see, a lot of activity, as I mentioned. So even though we've got the broadband bill out there that everybody's looking at, all the states are looking at what they can do and who's going to have a need in their states, all this activity is already going on. And again, lots of broadband's going to be expanding quite a bit before those funds are ever released. Plus, as I mentioned in previous broadcasts, you've got what AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile are doing with 5G. And those 5G deployments or activations are also going to be over the 100 by 20 requirement for broadband. So basically, what does that do? The maps as well. So we'll have to see how that all works out. But lots going on, lots of money available, lots of companies. If you're looking at, if you're somebody that's like us that provides these services, there's a lot out there that we can do. So if you're a company that's one of these companies that's looking for help on deploying broadband, whether it's everything from the very beginning of a feasibility study to engineering, construction, after the deployment services like help desk services or CALIA or DDoS protection, carrier grade NAT, IP management, all of those things we do. So reach out to us. You can see our website, email, and phone number there. And hope this was helpful. Hope it was interesting. If so, please give me a thumbs up on the video. Go ahead and click subscribe to be notified. You got to click the little bell as well and just select all on notifications, and then you'll be notified when I am live. I'm live every day with broadband deployment news or Tech Tuesday on Tuesdays. So that's every weekday. So thanks for joining me, and I will see you next time. Take care.